There is a phrase quietly printed into almost every American employment contract, and it means your employer can end your career for a good cause, a bad cause, or no cause whatsoever. Most people never learn what that sentence does until the worst week of their lives. Today, we're listing instances where people lost their jobs for the strangest and most absurd reasons. 1. Too attractive to keep employed. That's not a punchline. It's a legal defense that worked. Melissa Nelson had spent 10 years as a dental assistant in Fort Dodge, Iowa, and nobody questioned her work. Her boss questioned her presence. Dr. James Knight told her she was a threat to his marriage, with his pastor sitting in the room for moral backup, and sent her home permanently. Nelson sued for gender discrimination. In 2012, the all-male Iowa Supreme Court ruled unanimously against her, and their logic was almost beautiful in its awfulness. He didn't fire her for being a woman. He fired her for being irresistible. Irresistibility, they noted, is not a protected class. They reaffirmed the decision in 2013, presumably for anyone who missed it. 10 years of spotless service, undone by a feeling that wasn't even hers. 2. A surprise birthday party once cost a Kentucky company around $450,000. Kevin Burling had exactly one request when he joined Gravity Diagnostics in 2019. No celebration for him, ever. He had an anxiety disorder, and being the center of a room was a reliable trigger. The office manager forgot. Co-workers gathered in the lunchroom with a cake and his name on it, and Burling walked out to his car to breathe. The following day, 2 managers pulled him into a meeting and scolded him for spoiling everyone's fun, which triggered a second panic attack right in front of them. Days later, he was terminated as a workplace safety risk. A jury heard all of this in March 2022 and handed him that 6-figure verdict. Most expensive sheet cake ever purchased in North America. 3. Someone is drowning about a quarter-mile down the beach. You're a 21-year-old lifeguard. The complication is that the water in question sits just outside the stretch of sand your employer is paid to watch. Thomas Lopez ran anyway. This was Hallandale Beach, Florida, July 2012, and he helped drag the swimmer out and handed him to paramedics. Then he came back and filled out an incident report like a responsible employee, which is how his supervisor found out. Fired that day for leaving his zone. The company cited insurance coverage, which is a real business concern, and also a genuinely strange thing to say out loud about a man who just saved a life. Several co-workers quit in protest within 24 hours. Once the story went national, the company offered Lopez his job back. He declined. Still the most satisfying sentence in this entire video. 4. How much do you actually owe your employer? 40 hours a week is the standard answer. Debbie Stevens went with an internal organ. Her boss at a Long Island car dealership needed a kidney, and Stevens volunteered. She wasn't a match, so she donated hers to a stranger instead, which moved her boss up the transplant list. Real surgery, real recovery, 1 kidney permanently gone. Then, according to the complaint she filed with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission in 2012, the gratitude evaporated. She described hostility over her healing time, a reassignment to a dealership an hour farther from home, and eventually the door. Her attorney put it plainly. She gave away a body part and got punished for needing time to recover from it. Next time a manager tells you the office is a family, remember the woman who actually treated it like one. 5. A necktie ended this one. Green and gold, roughly 4 ounces of polyester, worn to work in suburban Chicago in 2004. John Stone's employer was shooting photos for a company brochure, and the owner, a devoted Bears fan, announced that everyone would be in Bears gear that day. Stone grew up in Wisconsin. Stone is a Packers man. Stone wore the tie. He was told to remove it, declined, and was fired for insubordination before the afternoon was over. Illinois unemployment officials sided with him on the sturdy legal reasoning that supporting the wrong football team does not constitute misconduct, Packers fans mailed him cash, job offers, and an avalanche of replacement ties. As far as anyone can determine, John Stone remains the only American ever professionally martyred over the NFC North. 6. On a Friday in March 2012, employees at a Florida law firm coordinated orange shirts for a reason so boring it's almost insulting. They were heading to happy hour afterward and wanted to spot each other in a crowded bar. Management walked in, saw a wall of orange, and concluded it was an organized protest against the company. All 14 were called in and fired the same day. No investigation, no warning. Nobody stopped to ask the obvious question, which is what kind of workplace uprising has no demands and ends in buffalo wings? Florida is an at-will state, so absent proof of protected organizing activity, the firm was operating inside its rights. 14 careers, terminated by a shade you can buy at any department store for $11. 7. For roughly a year, American law officially held that clicking like meant nothing whatsoever. Here's how that happened. 6 employees of a Virginia sheriff's office backed their boss's opponent in a 2009 local election, and one of them, Daniel Ray Carter, clicked like on the challenger's Facebook page. The sheriff won. The 6 were shown the door. They sued on First Amendment grounds, and in 2012, a federal judge ruled against them with a sentence that aged like warm milk. A Facebook like was insufficient speech to earn constitutional protection. One click, he reasoned, isn't really saying anything. The Fourth Circuit reversed it in 2013, correctly observing that a thumbs up is the digital version of planting a sign in your front yard. Somewhere out there is a judge who has thought about that opinion every day since. 8. You're sitting on your own porch on a Sunday afternoon, off the clock, smoking a cigarette you paid for with your own money. Fireable? At one Michigan company, absolutely. Waco, a benefits firm outside Lansing, banned smoking in January 2005. Not smoking at work, smoking at all. Founder Howard Wires introduced mandatory nicotine testing and made clear that a positive result ended your employment regardless of where or when you lit up. 4 employees refused the test and lost their jobs. Not one law was broken. Michigan had no statute shielding off-duty smokers, so your living room fell squarely inside your employer's jurisdiction. About half of American states do protect that behavior, which produces a lovely absurdity. The identical cigarette is a private lifestyle choice on one side of a state line and a career-ending offense on the other. 9. Ask most Americans whether a boss can fire them over a bumper sticker, and they'll say no, free speech, First Amendment. They are wrong, and Lynn Gobble has the paperwork to prove it. She was working at an insulation plant in Moulton, Alabama, in September 2004 when her employer spotted a John Kerry sticker on her car in the parking lot and offered a choice: scrape it off or get out. She kept the sticker. She lost the job. Entirely legal, because the First Amendment restrains the government, not your shift supervisor, and most states let private employers punish political speech without consequence. The story reached the Kerry campaign, the candidate personally phoned her, and she spent the rest of the election working for the man on her bumper. Charming ending. Genuinely alarming rule underneath it. 10. A glass of wine, raised in a European restaurant, posted to a private account. That was the offense. Ashley Payne was a 24-year-old high school English teacher in Barrow County, Georgia, who saved up, traveled through Europe, and did what every human on Earth does with a vacation. She posted the photos. Then an anonymous email landed in her principal's office. Payne was pulled out of her classroom and handed a choice: resign now or face suspension. She resigned, then spent years fighting to reclaim her career. She was of legal drinking age on her own time, in countries where wine functions as a beverage category rather than a scandal. Her actual violation was supplying photographic evidence that teachers continue to exist after 3 in the afternoon. 11. A perfectly good hamburger. That's it. That's the object at the center of this. In 2015, a 19-year-old employee of a fast food restaurant in Beloit, Wisconsin, ended her shift, was told the burger was going in the trash anyway, and handed it to a homeless man outside instead. The next day, her manager terminated her for theft. Company policy said unsold food gets discarded, not distributed, because giving it away creates liability and encourages people to make extra on purpose. She said she'd rather feed someone than fill a dumpster. The story hit national news, and the company scrambled to explain itself. The economics here are worth sitting with. The meal had exactly zero value to the business and infinite value to the man who ate it. 12. 400 people found out they were unemployed by checking their inbox. Radio Shack ran the layoff that way at its Fort Worth headquarters in August 2006. No meeting, no manager, no awkward handshake, no walk to the parking lot. Just a message carrying the emotional weight of a recurring calendar invite. The company defended it as the fastest and most consistent way to notify everyone simultaneously, which is technically accurate and spiritually indefensible. Employees were reportedly given around 30 minutes to collect their belongings. Do the math on 400 people, and it becomes near certain that at least one of them was, at that exact moment, on the phone helping a stranger find the correct battery for a garage door opener. Decades of loyalty ended by a message that took 11 seconds to write. 13. 3 minutes. That's how long it took to end 900 careers. On the 1st of December, 2021, employees of the mortgage company Better logged onto a Zoom call where the chief executive informed them that if they were on this call, they were part of the group being let go, effective immediately. Then it was over. Someone recorded it, obviously, and by dinner time it had been watched millions of times. The timing supplied the garnish. 3 weeks before Christmas, shortly after the company had secured an enormous funding injection. The CEO took a leave of absence, returned, and the company went public regardless. 900 people lost their income in less time than it takes to microwave a burrito, setting a benchmark that every HR department on Earth now quietly measures itself against. 14. Nobody fired Stephen Normandin. That's the genuinely unsettling part. He spent 4 years delivering packages as an Amazon Flex driver in Phoenix, a veteran with a clean record, and a car permanently full of other people's boxes. Then an email arrived announcing his account had been terminated. No manager, no phone call, no human being anywhere in the chain. An algorithm reviewed his performance data and decided he was finished. According to Bloomberg's reporting, the system had been docking him for circumstances completely outside his control. Apartment complexes locked at delivery time, customers not home, buildings with no access code. Any supervisor with a pulse would have understood in 4 seconds. He appealed. The appeals process was also automated. A working man was let go by software that had developed opinions about him. 15. A corn muffin and a small container of tartar sauce. That pairing raises serious culinary questions, but the intent behind it is perfectly clear. Joe Koblenzer was 73, working at a Cracker Barrel in Venice, Florida, mostly to stay busy and around people. A homeless man came in and asked whether there was anything to eat. Koblenzer handed him the muffin. He was fired for it because company policy prohibits giving away food and nobody had written an exception for hungry strangers. The story went national. The internet reacted the way the internet reacts, and the company held the line that this was about the rule and not the muffin. A defensible position right up until you say the full sentence out loud. A man in his 70s lost his job over 80 cents of cornbread. 16. The suspect pulled a handgun in the back office. 4 Walmart employees in Layton, Utah, had escorted him there in January 2011 on suspicion of shoplifting, and instead of scattering, they wrestled him down, stripped the weapon away, and held him until police arrived. Nobody was shot. Nobody was even injured. Everyone went home. All 4 were then fired. Walmart's policy is unambiguous. If a suspect produces a weapon, employees disengage and withdraw because escalating an armed confrontation is exactly how retail workers end up dead. That is a defensible corporate rule and also an extraordinarily awkward thing to explain to 4 people who just disarmed a gunman in a stockroom with their bare hands. They contested it. The policy won. Somewhere in that handbook, courage is filed under misconduct. 17. What's the most expensive $20 you've ever spent? A group of Fidelity Investments employees in Texas can beat it. In 2011, they were fired for running a fantasy football league with a $20 buy-in. The company's position was that it constituted gambling on company property, and enormous financial firms are famously allergic to anything resembling unregulated betting. One of the terminated employees pointed out that managers had leagues of their own. Roughly 40 million Americans play fantasy football, a healthy share of them from a desk chair during business hours, on a company laptop, while pretending to study a spreadsheet. These particular players simply worked somewhere that read its own conduct policy with total literal seriousness, on a day when somebody happened to be paying attention. A full career traded for a waiver wire pickup. 18. Get married, get fired. Turn 32, get fired. Those were literal written conditions of employment for American flight attendants well into the 1960s, alongside weight checks, height limits, and periodic appearance evaluations. Airlines marketed the cabin as much as the aircraft, and the workforce was managed accordingly, with a shelf life printed into the contract. Women who wed sometimes hid their rings and their spouses for years. After the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the complaints started stacking up, and by the late 60s, federal regulators had determined the marriage and age rules violated the law. An entire profession was quietly aged out of existence every few years, and it took an act of Congress to stop it. 19. Picture a courtroom where a police officer is suing for the right to be less intelligent. Robert Jordan applied to the new London, Connecticut force in 1996 and scored a 33 on the aptitude exam, well above the department's target band of 20 to 27. He was never interviewed. The department explained that high scorers get bored, leave, and waste expensive training. Jordan sued, arguing that punishing intelligence is irrational. In 2000, the Second Circuit ruled against him. The policy applied uniformly, so it was lawful. Jordan had already worked as a corrections officer and went on to a long career in that field. He simply holds the unique distinction of being formally, legally, documentably too smart to be hired. 20. 12 minutes of stand-up comedy ended a 30-year career. In 2019, a longtime employee at a manufacturing plant performed at an open mic night and made jokes about his workplace, using no names and no company. Someone recorded it and sent the clip to management. He was gone the next week. Employment lawyers see this pattern constantly. The joke is protected as speech from the government and completely unprotected from your boss. Comedy clubs in factory towns are quietly full of people who have learned to change every identifying detail. The genuinely strange consequence is that America has an entire subgenre of workplace humor performed under an unspoken rule that the material must be true enough to be funny and vague enough to survive. 21. A cheese sandwich worth about £1.70. In 2016, a Greggs bakery worker in Newcastle, England, ate one that had been sitting past its sell-by time and was already destined for the bin. She was dismissed for gross misconduct. Her defense was the only defense available. The sandwich had no future. Nobody was going to buy it, nobody was going to sell it, and its next stop was a plastic sack. Company policy treated consuming waste stock as theft, on the theory that staff might otherwise engineer surplus on purpose. That's a real concern in retail, and it's also a very long chain of reasoning to arrive at firing an adult over expired cheddar. The bread was legally garbage. She was legally a thief. 22. He was fired for refusing to ruin his employees' Thanksgiving, and it lasted about a week. Tony Rohr had spent roughly a decade working his way up to general manager at a Pizza Hut in Elkhart, Indiana. In November 2013, the franchise ordered its stores open on Thanksgiving Day. Rohr declined, on the grounds that his crew had families and that the holiday is functionally the only reason the holiday exists. He was told to resign. He refused to do that either, wrote a letter explaining exactly why, and was terminated. The letter went national inside 48 hours. Corporate publicly distanced itself from the franchisee, and Rohr was offered his job back along with an apology. He is one of the very few people in this entire video who was fired, vindicated, and reinstated within the same news cycle. 23. Myrna Arias sold wire transfer services in California, and her employer required her to install a workforce management app on her phone. Standard enough, except she alleged the app tracked her location around the clock, on weekends, after hours, in her own driveway at midnight. According to her 2015 lawsuit, when she pointed this out, a manager compared it to knowing how fast she drove. She deleted the app. She was fired weeks later. The case settled quietly, but it landed at exactly the moment American employers were discovering that a phone is a leash with a battery. The genuinely unsettling part isn't the surveillance. It's that in most states, an employer asking to watch your Saturday is entirely permissible. 24. An eyebrow ring cost Kimberly Cloutier her cashier job at a Massachusetts Costco. She wasn't hiding it. She belonged to the Church of Body Modification, a small recognized organization whose adherents treat piercings and tattoos as spiritual practice, and she argued that removing the jewelry violated her faith. Costco's dress code banned facial jewelry, offered a clear plastic retainer as a compromise, and she declined. The First Circuit Court of Appeals ruled against her in 2004, deciding that accommodating her would impose an undue hardship on the company's public image. So a federal appeals court weighed a sincere religious belief against the aesthetic preferences of a warehouse club, and the warehouse club won on points. 25. 11 hours in the air with no internet is a long time for the world to make up its mind about you. In December 2013, a public relations executive named Justine Sacco posted a joke to a few hundred followers before a flight to South Africa. The joke was bad enough that repeating it here would serve nobody. By the time her plane touched down, she was the #1 trending topic on the planet. Strangers were tracking her flight number in real time, and her employer had already issued a statement. She landed unemployed and internationally famous in that order. It remains the cleanest demonstration ever recorded of how fast a career can end while its owner is asleep with a neck pillow. 26. A librarian was fired for the books she declined to remove. In 2022, a Michigan library director resigned under pressure after refusing to pull certain titles from shelves, and voters in that community subsequently defunded the entire library in a millage vote. The library nearly closed. Then something unexpected happened. Donations arrived from around the country, including from authors whose books were at the center of the dispute, and the library survived until a later vote restored funding. A single professional decision by one employee first cost her the job, and then briefly took down an entire town's library with her. Few firings in American history have generated a more direct chain of consequences per person involved. 27. An open letter about the price of groceries. That's what ended it. In February 2016, a customer support employee at a San Francisco food delivery company published a public essay describing what her wages actually bought: a long commute, a shrinking pantry, and a running tally of what she couldn't afford in one of the most expensive metros on Earth. It went viral within hours. She was let go the same day. The company's chief executive stated publicly that the letter wasn't the reason for the termination. The timing did an enormous amount of unpaid work in shaping public opinion. Two facts sit next to each other here uncomfortably. Writing honestly about your pay is protected in many circumstances, and proving that's why you were fired is nearly impossible. 28. A friend posted a photo. That's the entire offense. Kimberly Hester was a teacher's aide at a Michigan elementary school in 2012 when a picture surfaced that her school district wanted context for, and administrators asked her to hand over her Facebook login so they could look through her account themselves. She refused repeatedly and was suspended and then pushed out of the job. There was no law against the request at the time, which is the actual headline. Her case became a national talking point, and by the end of that same year, Michigan had passed legislation banning employers from demanding social media passwords. Roughly 24 states followed. One aide's stubbornness rewrote the rulebook for millions of people. 29. There's a verb in American slang that exists because of one woman's blog. In 2002, a web designer named Heather Armstrong wrote candidly online about her workplace and co-workers using no names on a personal site with a modest readership. Someone at her company found it. She was fired. The domain was deuce.com, and within a couple of years, deuced had entered common usage as the term for losing your job over something you wrote on the internet. It got picked up by dictionaries and cited in newspapers. Think about the scale of that. A firing so early in the history of personal publishing that the English language had to invent a word to describe it, and the word came from the victim's URL. 30. Most people in this video were filmed by someone else. This man operated the camera himself. In 2012, Adam Smith was the chief financial officer of a medical device company in Arizona. He drove to a fast food restaurant, aimed a lens at a young woman working the drive-through window, and lectured her about a political controversy involving her employer. She stayed polite for the entire exchange. He uploaded it. He was out of his job in roughly a day. The aftermath was brutal. He later described 2 years without work, a family on food stamps, the loss of his home, and a stretch living in an RV. He eventually apologized publicly and said the worker had conducted herself better than he had. She earned a fraction of his salary and was the only professional in the recording. 31. 37 years underground, ended by a scanner. Beverly Butcher was a West Virginia coal miner whose employer installed a biometric hand reader to log shifts. Butcher, an evangelical Christian, believed the technology was tied to the mark of the beast described in Revelation and asked to keep signing in on paper. The company had already granted scanner exemptions to 2 workers with hand injuries, so the alternative literally existed and was already in use. It refused him anyway. Facing discipline, he retired under protest. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission sued on his behalf, and in 2015, a jury sided with Butcher, with the total award reaching roughly $586,000. The workaround was sitting on the shelf. Declining to use it cost more than $500,000. 32. A cardboard cutout of a dime. That's the entire crime. In 1963, a young man in Carlisle, Iowa, used a fake coin in a laundromat washing machine, took his penalty, and got on with his life. 49 years later, Richard Eggers was 68, 7 years into a customer service job at Wells Fargo in Des Moines when a background check surfaced it. He was fired. Not out of cruelty, federal banking rules bar institutions from employing anyone convicted of a crime involving dishonesty, and nobody had written an exception for a teenager and a washing machine. Banks across the country purged long-serving workers over decades-old minor convictions during that stretch. Eggers had a clean record at the bank. The dime he faked was worth 10 cents in 1963 money, and it ended a career half a century later. 33. A mail carrier in rural Pennsylvania didn't want to work Sundays. For most of postal history, that was a non-issue, since Sunday delivery barely existed. Then the Postal Service signed a contract to deliver packages for a certain enormous online retailer. Sundays became mandatory, and Gerald Groff, a devout Christian, kept declining. Discipline stacked up until he resigned rather than be terminated. His case reached the Supreme Court, And in June 2023, the justices ruled unanimously in his favor, sharply raising the bar for what counts as a hardship when an employer refuses a religious accommodation. The decision now governs accommodation claims for every worker in the country. It exists because of a package delivery schedule. 34. The first real crack in the wall came from a man who refused to lie. In 1959, a union business agent in California was instructed to give false testimony to a state legislative committee. He told the truth instead and was fired the next day. A California appeals court ruled that firing someone for refusing to commit a crime was intolerable and created what's now called the public policy exception. Nearly every state adopted some version of it. So the entire modern concept of a wrongful termination lawsuit exists because one person decided that perjury wasn't in his job description. 35. Nuclear power plant. Overnight shift. Armed security officers responsible for guarding a live reactor asleep in a back room. This was Peach Bottom in Pennsylvania in 2007, and it might have stayed buried except that one guard, Carrie Beal, reported it, got nowhere internally, and eventually handed video footage to a television network. The clips showed colleagues dozing in what staff called the ready room. The response was swift. Guards were fired, the security contractor lost the site, and federal regulators opened an investigation. Here's the detail that complicates the whole thing. Guards had been complaining for years about punishing overtime schedules that made staying alert nearly impossible. Everyone was following the rules exactly. The rules were the problem. 36. The rule catches the top of the ladder too, and when it does, the numbers get ridiculous. McDonald's terminated its chief executive in late 2019 over a consensual relationship with an employee that violated company policy. He left with an exit package. Then the company kept digging, concluded there had been more than one such relationship, and sued him. In December 2021, he returned equity and cash valued at roughly $105 million and issued a public apology. That is the most expensive workplace romance ever documented, by a margin so wide, it isn't a competition. Every handbook clause you've skimmed past applies to the person whose name is on the building. Okay, 36 down, 1 to go. Before we get to number 37, it's time for the final verdict. In our judgment, the award for the most unbelievable ruling on today's list goes to the Iowa Supreme Court's decision that a dentist could legally fire a 10-year employee for being too attractive. Not because it was cruel, though it was, but because a court of law sat down, thought carefully, and concluded that irresistibility isn't a protected characteristic. Do you agree with our verdict? Or did another entry earn that dubious crown? Tell us in the comments. Now, our final number. 37. 4 months as chief executive of Yahoo, destroyed by a single line in a bio. Scott Thompson took the job in January 2012. That May, an activist investor named Daniel Loeb published a note observing that Thompson's official biography credited him with a computer science degree from Stonehill College. Stonehill hadn't offered that degree while he was there. His actual degree was in accounting. That was the whole offense. One word, in one credential, on one page. He was out within days. The boardroom fight that followed reshuffled the company's entire leadership and eventually installed Marissa Mayer. A resume embellishment sat harmlessly in place for years, and then vaporized a Fortune 500 career the instant a hedge fund had a financial reason to look it up. Almost nobody here did anything wrong. They just worked for someone who had the power to end it and used it. If you've ever been fired for something small or watched it happen to a coworker, you already know how fast it goes. So tell us in the comments, have you ever been fired for something ridiculous? We want to hear it. Like the video, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.